Okay, so today's presentation is the introduction to safeguarding. It's going to be children, young people and adults at risk. Now, as I go through the presentation, you'll see that there's a lot of times I will refer to either children or young people or adults at risk. But all of the stuff that I talk about can be used for each section. Anything that relates to adults at risk can also be used and is used for children and young people and vice versa. About halfway through the presentation, there is a point where I talk about some media cases which have helped shape safeguarding as it is today. Although there's nothing in the media presentation part of it which is would say there's nothing that's graphic or anything like that. They are two of the cases are very well known, and they do involve the death of a child. So just to make you aware that when we get to that point, if anyone does want to mute it or just leave the room or something like that, that's absolutely fine. I do understand, but it has been made for an audience, so it wouldn't be offensive or upsetting. So, as Anne introduced, I'm Stuart. I am the Senior Safeguarding Consultant for SFA Consultancy. I'm also the Voluntary Safeguarding Advisor for the Steve Sinnott Foundation. I've been in law enforcement for the last 17 years, and I've done it in a wide range of safeguarding roles. These have included investigating online offending against children, child sexual exploitation, domestic abuse, safeguarding adults at risk, and my most current job is in the homicide unit. During my career, I've worked with lots and lots of different organisations. These include nationally with the National Crime Agency and the CEOP, the Internet Watch Foundation, local authority safeguarding boards, and internationally with NECMEC, which is the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children, which is based in the USA, and Interpol. And as it says there, I'm also the Volunteer Safeguarding Advisor for the Steve Sinnott Foundation. I've just been employed as well by SAB Consultants. I am a associate consultant with them, and the work I do with them will include working with people like Bupa, the Football Premier League, and TUI, just to name but a few. So the course content today is, these are very broad. We may deviate into other areas depending on time or the questions that I'm asked. But in essence, it will be, what do we mean by safeguarding? We'll cover the 6 safeguarding principles, the definitions. And the reason I do definitions is one thing that I've found working for law enforcement is that the definitions of what is considered to be a child or a young person or significant harm or an adult at risk can change depending on what industry you come from. So the definitions is just to say what we use in the world of safeguarding, both in law enforcement and outside. We'll do safeguarding in the media. I've already spoken about that. That will be some reports, some inquiries and some major case reviews that have helped shape safeguarding for the last sort of 20 years. Talk a little bit about information sharing, and at the end there'll be some additional help and guidance around safeguarding and how we can report any concerns we have. So the measurable outcomes, hopefully by the end of the session, the participants will be able to define the term safeguarding and other subject related terms. We'll be able to list the different categories of abuse. We'll be aware of their responsibility to report concerns and share information. We'll recognise the importance of safeguarding, having discussed high profile media cases, and we'll be able to identify who to report any concerns to. So what do we mean by safeguarding? Safeguarding is what we do for all children and adults at risk. So it's the policies and procedures and safeguarding statements that we put in place to help children and adults at risk be safe in anything they undertake. We do this by using designated safeguarding leads or designating safeguarding officers. When we use the term child protection, that is for children that have come into contact with us already and who are at risk of being harmed or who have been harmed, and that risk will be a significant risk. So child protection, you'll usually find people use that term, sort of child protection units in the police, safeguarding boards and child protection teams at councils. So when we talk about safeguarding itself, we mean keeping people safe from harm, abuse and or neglect. And it's quite a broad term. So abuse, we say, is when someone does something to a person that can cause harm. We say that that is emotional or physical harm. And neglect is when you're not being given the care and support that they need to live their life. And this can include self-neglect. And as you'll see when we get to the end, safeguarding comes into all forms of all law enforcement and all industries, whether that's police all the way down to an after-school club. So all those working with children and young people and adults at risk must take reasonable steps to ensure that risks to their welfare are minimised. When concerns are raised, all parties must take the appropriate action. So abuse and neglect is a form of maltreatment of a child. So this could also, as I said earlier, this could also be an adult at risk. Somebody may abuse or neglect a child by inflicting harm or by failing to act to prevent harm. This second reference comes from Working Together, which is dated in 2015, and its children may be abused in the family or in an individual or a community setting by those known to them, or more rarely by others via the internet. They may be abused by an adult or another child or children. Over the last sort of 10, 15 years, the abuse which has happened via the internet has become a lot more prevalent, especially with smartphones and the way that children are now interacting with the internet sort of most of the day and over the weekend, and the access they have to it. So for the purpose of safeguarding, a definition of a child is anyone who has not reached their 18th birthday, and that comes from the Children's Act in 1989, which was reviewed in 2004. Even if a child has reached 16 years of age and is living independently, is in further education, or is a member of the armed forces, is in hospital or in custody in a secure state for children and young people, this does not change their status or entitlement to services or protection, sorry. And although an unborn children are not included in the definition of children per se, intervention to ensure their future well-being is encompassed within safeguarding children practice. An adult at risk. This definition has been changed slightly, only by its title. You may hear it be referred to as vulnerable adult. Adult at risk is changed. That was changed under the Care Act in 2014. And that's a person aged 18 or over and at risk of abuse or neglect because of their needs for care and support. The person does not need to be receiving any particular service in order for the safeguarding duties to apply. Excuse me. So, the categories of abuse we're talking about can be to each section of safeguarding, so children and adults. However, as I'll explain in a second, some of those are crossing over, so we have got some mix here. So with children, it's predominantly physical, sexual, emotional, or neglect. With adults, it's physical, domestic violence and abuse, sexual, psychological, financial or material, modern slaveries, discriminatory, neglect and acts of omission, and self-neglect. We have, in the past few years, seen modern slavery move from adults to into the sort of arena of children being used. And we've seen this with people that have come to this country, immigrants that have come to this country and have been sort of roped into gangs in relation to work gangs, and also in relation to modern slavery. We've got the organised begging as well, where young children are being coerced into spending long hours begging on the streets under some sort of organised crime group. The context of the abuse itself can change. We have mate crime and fake friends. We have fabricated and induced illness, which is called FII. That used to be called Munchausen syndrome, but it's been changed to induced illness. Honour-based violence, forced marriages, missing, exploited and trafficked, female genital mutilation, hate crime, professional cyber abuse and extremism. So they're the contexts that we find abuse. They tend to be the ones that we see quite a lot in law enforcement. However, safeguarding is always changing, and some categories of abuse will increase, change, and develop, and that's in relation to social, economic, and technological changes. And it's kind of, this is what we do in safeguarding. We're always trying to keep up with where the next trend in abuse is going to come from. It is at the moment with the internet. We have a lot of trouble with that, but as I say, we're always aware of what's going on in the background in relation to social and economic changes. We've seen a lot of abuse around county lines recently, which is a new one, which is our drug dealers that are moving from cities into small rural areas and taking over the house of a vulnerable person and using it to sell illegal drugs from. So, as I say, we're always keeping an eye on developing trends and where our next vulnerable victim or child could be hurt from. So we have the 6 safeguarding principles. Now, I will let you read these. I'll give you some time to read these. I don't want it to sort of me to just be talking to you. Now, these were set out by the CARE Act, and these were put in place for adults at risk. And these underpin all safeguarding. So although they were developed initially for adults at risk, they have been adopted by safeguarding across the board. So I'll just give you a few minutes for each one. Okay, I'm just going to go on to the next slide. If anyone is still reading, if they could just let me know. And again, I'm just going to move on to the next slide. So if anyone's still reading, please let me know. So those six safeguarding principles cover all of safeguarding, and there are two main ones to take from that is promoting and protecting. Now, for all organisations, promoting the health and welfare of children and adults at risk is very, very important, as is protecting children and adults at risk from harm. So if you can't remember those six, and they are quite wordy, these two are your main two things to take from the principles, just to say that it's everyone's responsibility. So this is what I spoke about before. This is safeguarding in the media. These are the serious case reviews and inquiries. Now, the problem with safeguarding, and the problem that safeguarding has had over the years, is the only reason people tend to make changes and people tend to make statutory changes and put things in front of Parliament and trying to change laws and the way we share information and the way we behave, usually comes off the back of something very, very serious. And it usually involves someone being hurt or killed before people make those changes to how we look after vulnerable children, vulnerable adults. So this is a case which is should be well known to most people. A horrific case, which was the murder of Victoria Colombier. Now, she was murdered on the 25th of February 2000. She was tortured and murdered by her great aunt and her great aunt's boyfriend. Her death eventually led to a public inquiry and produced major changes in child protection policies. Now, she was already known to services. Services were aware of Victoria, which is why it changed child protection policies, because she was already under a child protection plan. And sad to say, as the Queen's Counsel said in his opening statement, he listed no fewer than 12 key occasions when the relevant services had the opportunity to successfully intervene in the life of Victoria. As evidence to the inquiry unfolded, several other opportunities emerged. Not one of these opportunities required great skill or would have made heavy demands on time to take some form of actions. Sometimes it needed nothing more than a manager doing their job by asking the pertinent questions or taking the trouble to look in the case file. There can be no excuse for such sloppy and unprofessional performance. And absolutely, there's a number of programs on Victoria. There's a number of documentaries. It's very, very difficult viewing for anyone who did want to look them up. A horrific case and something that should never have happened. The subsequent inquiry was done by Lord Lamming. And that was on the 28th of January 2003. You can actually find that on www.gov.uk, and it comes, the original inquiries on there and the recommendations that were made, and there's also a progress report that was done by Lord Lamming on the 12th of March 2009, which is the protection of children in England. Excuse me. The Lamming report in particular illustrates failures in communication and information sharing between agencies. Lessons learned from this and other cases have strengthened the legal framework for safeguarding, and it now fully supports staff in creating a safer environment. Safeguarding has come a long way in the last 20 years, but as you'll see in a moment, sadly, it's still got a long way to go. This is a second high-profile case, and these were the Surham murders. These were the murders of two 10-year-old girls, which occurred in Surham, Cambridgeshire. Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. That picture's quite infamous of them in their Man United kits. They were lured into the house of a local resident, Ian Huntley, who subsequently murdered both girls. On the back of his conviction, the Bichard Inquiry Report of 2004 was commissioned by the government, and that was following Ian Huntley's conviction. Ian Huntley worked as a caretaker at the school both girls attended, and although Huntley was vetted for the post, including police checks, these checks failed to identify previous allegations of sexual offences and serious incidents between 1995 and 1999 in two other different geographical areas. Now, this had a huge impact on the way information is shared, particularly by police forces around the UK. Now, the Bichard Report made these key suggestions: a registration scheme for all wishing to work with children or vulnerable people, an introduction of a national police intelligence system for England and Wales. And that's quite shocking to say that before this horrific murder took place, there was no national police intelligence system. There was nothing that someone in Manchester or Greater Manchester could search and find intelligence. So we're not talking about convictions, we're talking about allegations, we're talking about things that have come to the police but hadn't quite crossed the custody threshold, the kind of stuff that police would use to build up pictures, build up warrants, and build up knowledge of people committing offences in their area. This was not available until the police national database was put together. Excuse me. A clear code of practice for all police forces for recording and sharing data. Now, what this brought about was the Sexual Offences Disclosure Scheme. And this basically, in short, gave people who had primary care for a child, so a parent or a grandparent, if a new person was introduced to that child's life, whether it was a new boyfriend, a new partner, a new sort of football coach that wasn't underneath like the Football Association, that carer could go to the police and ask if there was any information held or any intelligence held in relation to that person who now had contact with that child. Training for head teachers and governors on how to interview, ensuring that people are employed according to safeguarding rules. Guidance for social services on when they should refer cases involving underage sex to the police. And the main thing that has come from the Bichard Report was the CBR checks, now called DBS checks, making it possible to check each person for any previous crimes. So it's been tightened up since that horrific murder. There's the Stafford Hospital case as well. Now, the Stafford Hospital case isn't as sort of high profile as the other two cases, but it also points out that the failings can be institutional as well. The failings at Stafford Hospital are considered one of the biggest scandals in the history of the NHS, with years of abuse and neglect at hospitals leading to unnecessary deaths of hundreds of patients. In 2009, a report by the Healthcare Commission laid bare the problems at Stafford, which was run by the Mid Staffordshire NHS Trust. The regulator condemned appalling standards of care and reported that there had been at least 400 more deaths than expected between 2005 and 2008. I've read some of that report, not all of it, and they even say that at one point there was a receptionist who was making diagnoses around people's illnesses. So the failings there were immense. And just to look at those again, I'm just going to go back one. People say, oh, well, it must have improved. They were sort of 10, 20 years ago. Well, 2 weeks ago, the inquiry into child sexual abuse released a report about the Church of England and condemned its safeguarding procedures, its victim care, and the way that it dealt with allegations. And that inquiry actually still has 15 ongoing investigations. And they cover boys' homes, custodial institutions, other faith organisations, councils, and non-recent sexual abuse committed by people in Westminster. So, as I say, we have learned a lot in the last 20 years, and safeguarding has come on quite a bit, but we can't be complacent, and we must make sure that everybody is aware that safeguarding is their responsibility. One of the scariest things about safeguarding for people that are kind of use it, but are not well trained in it, or are maybe not that up to date with it, is information sharing. People never know what information they can share under data protection, what's going to get them into trouble, what they can say, what they can't say, who they can tell, who they can't tell. So it becomes quite a difficult thing to do. But I would always say this, that keeping children and adults at risk safe from harm requires professionals and others to share information. And I've seen this in my last 17 years. It is like a jigsaw. Every little piece of information from everyone who interacts with that adult at risk or that child, if they supply that one little bit of information, when you see the whole picture, all of a sudden you can see what's happening to that child. And in many cases, it's only when that information is put together that risk of serious harm can be seen. So just to go through, there's 7 golden rules for information sharing. The first one, and I believe the most important one, is the Data Protection Act, or whatever, GDPR, anything like that, is not a barrier to share information. I'll go on to when we can share information in the next one, but it's not a barrier to sharing information. When you share the information, you've got to be open and honest. You've got to seek advice. You've got to share with consent where appropriate. You've got to consider the safety and well-being of what is said, and who has said it to you. This is very, very important when it comes to domestic abuse, because anything that goes back to the abuser puts the victim in a very serious situation where significant harm can be done. Anything we share must be necessary, proportionate, relevant, accurate, timely, and secure. And if you are sharing information, you really do need to keep a record of any decisions that you make as to why you're sharing it and the actual information you shared. The only other thing that I would say to this is, this goes for any conversations or anything you have with anyone. There's a saying in law enforcement that is, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. And it's a great way to live by, especially when dealing with safeguarding. I would also say that if you come up against any barriers to sharing information, escalate the matter to a line manager or take further advice. So I'm going to start at the bottom of this slide, because just to go over the information sharing, I think that's more important than what's above, is that we always need to remember that a child or an adult at risk's need is paramount. Their safety is paramount. Sometimes people are afraid to share information or say what they think they've seen. I would always share information if you think that child is at significant risk of harm, because the right people need to know what's going on. And a person's right to confidentiality is not an absolute and may be overridden where there is evidence that sharing information is necessary in an exceptional case to prevent. So any confidentiality can be breached if one of the following 5 criteria are met. That's serious crime, danger to a person's life, danger to others, danger to the community, or danger to the health of the person. So it covers quite a broad spectrum, and it doesn't really say what danger is. So it's kind of a little bit of an open book as to what you can share here. So if you do end up having to share any safeguarding concerns, you need to record it, as I've said previously. So you need to record down what you've seen and what you've heard, when you've heard it, who from, and where you were. You need to record your worry or concerns and how you responded at the time. Now, when it comes to how you responded at the time, there's nobody who would expect you to investigate these crimes. It's just to take, that will be done by professionals. It is just to see how you responded at the time, what you've done since, and what more do you need to do, whether that concern is low, medium, or high risk. And speak up. Each organisation, company, institution will have a whistleblowing policy. And it was a conversation I had with Anne yesterday. I don't really like the term whistleblowing because it gives connotations that you're going against the grain or you're speaking out of turn. And I don't believe that speaking up about safeguarding is either of these. But that's just my personal opinion on whistleblowing. But if you are talking to people and you do have concerns, it's your choice who to talk to. You can talk to your designated safeguarding lead or safeguarding officer. You can talk to your line manager, a senior manager of your choice, a trade union representative, human resources, a director, a non-executive director. My only advice would be is if you go to one of these people and you voice your concerns in the way that has been explained, follow up on it, ask what's been done, and if you believe that no action's been taken with the concerns that you have raised, then escalate it to the next level. So if you have a concern that a child or an adult at risk of abuse or neglect, you have a responsibility to act. These concerns will be addressed through local multi-agency safeguarding procedures once a referral has been made. Have a discussion with your line manager or whoever, anyone from that list that was previously on there. Contact your designated safeguarding lead or safeguarding team for advice and support. Make the referral by contacting children's or adult services, or if you need to and you believe it warrants it, contact the police. You will never be vilified for contacting anybody and raising a concern if that concern turns out not to be true or you turn out to be misinformed. You will never happen. You've got to report it, and you've always got to think, don't think, what if I'm wrong? Think, what if I'm right? You know, and if you are right, you have probably saved that child or that adult at risk from continued and prolonged abuse. If you're wrong, then you're wrong. But as I say, think, what if I'm wrong? Don't think, what if I'm right? As I've said before, safeguarding comes in all forms, all walks of life, lots of different people. It doesn't matter your financial, your economic status, your social status, doesn't matter your sex, your ethnicity. Safeguarding covers all of those, and it comes from all of those different communities as well. And each one has its own organization or its own foundation which deals with that specific safeguarding. This is the legislation and guidance. I've jumped ahead a little bit there. I do apologise. This is the legislation and guidance that is covered by us. It's the CARE Act. The local guidance comes from our Adult Safeguarding Board. We've got the Children's Act, the Sexual Offences Act 2003, Working Together 2015, and the local Safeguarding Children's Board. This is what I was saying before. We have lots of different people that can help. So if you ever come across a concern in safeguarding, but you don't know who to contact, it's a little bit, it might be something to do with drug abuse, with alcohol. It may be something to do with with terrorism, stuff like that. A quick Google will put you in contact with the right people, and these are the people to seek your advice from. These are the experts in their field, and they will help you, and they will all have their own safeguarding department, and some of them, like the NSPCC and Childline, are leaders in safeguarding, along with Bernardo's. So thank you. If you have any questions for today, I'll try to ask them. If not, you can email me at that email address, and there's also one for Anne there.